hate speech is a word you hear quite a lot today, not only around the Great Lakes region, but also in many other places, including in this land in which we are today, especially when I look at things around the culture wars that you have and the demonization of the other. So hate speech is not a new phenomenon. It has been there for a while. People who study anti-Semitism, for example, are very much aware of how this has been going on for quite a lot of generations. But a lot of literature now has explored how the emergence of social media has intensified this existing phenomenon to another quite higher level. So social media is a new tool that has made quite some negative. Besides all of the good things we do with our smartphones, social media has quite very much contributed to the amplification of hate speech with quite a lot of consequences. So, and in a paper we wrote, published in mid-2022, just a few weeks before the emergence of violent conflict around Goma, so it was a little bit before that, we ventured into the literature around hate speech and found out that it was collaborating in this case, as it is in other literature, studying other contexts, that hate speech does facilitate the emergence of transboundary networks, people seeking out like-minded individuals, seeking up the in-group, which help define the out-group. And within those networks, then, what they do is that they do create, refine, disseminate hateful speeches, targeting specific either individuals or communities. And this is made, or conspiracy theories in the case of the DRC. And this is made possible because precisely social media have different properties that ordinary, traditional media didn't have. They are more easily accessible and affordable. They are ubiquitous, of course. They are all over the place, everywhere, including even in our remote places where many of us in this room probably come from, North Kivu, South Kivu, or Ituri. And they allow for anonymity. Some people can do nasty things or say nasty things they couldn't say yesterday because they are able to hide behind some shades, some fake names, some troll names. Now, in the case of Congo, but also in some other places, once you have those online transboundary communities created, they tend to create or to generate scripted narratives, especially like in the case of Congo, as we will see, which propose simplified explanations about dynamics of violence, about conflict, but also, most importantly, identifying culprits. In North Kivu, it will be Banyarwanda in general, Tutsi, and it would be the Hema in the Ituri province. Now, what social media did in Congo, as in many other places, the studies show, is that in the past, most of the time you have had hate speech. Hate speech in Congo has a long history. From the 60s already, at least, we have empirical evidence showing that there are instances of hate speech. But what social media did was to amplify that, to strengthen those political network, to embolden actors to be venturing into more that, but also then to impact the dynamics of conflict. People can live stream conflict happening, as you saw many images from around Goma, but also South Kivu many times, but also Ituri. So in that sense, hate speech through social media has been very much normalized and amplified. And if you look then at more specifically at the Congolese landscape, and I'm coming to the second point, what triggered me to venture into studying, normally I have been doing things around conflict, peace, and justice and security, not necessarily hate speech, not necessarily study of social media. But what triggered me to do that is that particular caption of a tweet. That is, if you look at encircled dates, those who can still have good eyes, it was a tweet from the United Nations, the organization not far from where we are now, which in 2019 did tweet about a return of hateful violence within the context of the DRC, especially the South Kivu province, hate speech targeting the Banyamulenge community. And here the UN special envoy was condemning that and asking for action, but also, I remember correctly, promising justice, something that would be interesting, or at least threatening actors involved of justice being able to be brought before justice. So that was already a dynamic that was going on. This tweet was not when it was only first time happening, but at least this was one of the instances of global acknowledgement that that was a dynamic that was happening in the Kivus. Now, but as I said, and as Tom probably said it before me, and probably even some other speakers will go, this has a long history in Eastern DRC. In that, especially hateful narrative, and even more so conspiracy theories that you have in the DRC around balkanization, about infiltrators and so on. I'll come back to that later. Many of those really do have their roots in quite a long history, as I said, in the 60s, but also most importantly into identity politics that find their roots in colonial historiography. Now, if I had from Jean-Paul more than 20 minutes, I would spend probably in each of bullet points, probably I can easily spend 20 minutes explaining what I mean by racialization of identities under colonial rule and what impact it has today on hate speech. I can spend quite a lot of time talking about the governance institutions that were created under Belgian rule in the Great Lakes region, both in Rwanda, Burundi, and the DRC, and what that meant in terms of recognition of identity, of territorialized identity, but also recognition also meant legitimization of certain given claims over others, how all of this was done in many ways arbitrarily, but also how, and there is a lot of academic literature on that, how boundaries of identities were shaped through this colonial encounter. So boundaries basically in the sense that the colonial kind of countries found realities on the ground. Those realities didn't match their perceptions of the peoples encountered. And once they did so, they shaped those realities to meet their own image and what they wanted them to be. So what impact that had in terms of what became ethnicity, I hear a lot of narratives in the Great Lakes about essentialized identities. The Hema are like this, the Tutsis are like this, and so on. And many are not even aware of how much of what they are saying is part of the creation of the colonial myth around those identities. And I could spend quite a lot of time around what that meant then for citizenship after independence and narratives you have around authentic belonging, the work of Stefan Jackson, among many others. Any of this has pretty much still quite a lot of incidence, what we have in the center, on today's conflict and violence in Eastern DRC, but also in the DRC in general. But I just said that I spent a few minutes saying that I would not be talking about that. What I will be talking about mostly then, really continuing on hate speech and conspiracy theories, is a paper we conducted. So many of you, especially from Eastern Congo, probably who are on WhatsApp and many other social media, on a daily basis, probably you receive quite tons of videos, audios, and so on with the hate speech content, whether you are from Ituri, South Kivu, or North Kivu. And so we collected quite a number of those videos. At the time, much of the study was South Kivu focused, but increasingly some of the other later publications I had encompassed also North Kivu and somehow marginally Ituri. And so most of the time we focused on WhatsApp, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook materials that we collected. And what the analysis on all of that, and I will not go into the details in the interest of time about how we went around analyzing. I'll urge you to, I would be happy to share the paper that we produced to read more details. But what we found out was, one, that the question of agency is quite very important. So the creation of the transboundary hate communities through social media creates quite a number of narratives carried by different actors. In the case of the DRC, it's within the DRC and abroad. It's either within those particular communities, South Kivu and Ituri, but also North Kivu, or abroad at national level, but also abroad, diaspora communities. And those communities are quite very interesting. You have leaders of armed groups who communicate with people in New York, in Brussels, in Paris, members of civil society organizations who sell the image of human rights, protection of human rights or civic rights, either as individuals or as corporate organizations. But also you have a lot of ordinary citizens also who are engaged in both the creation and dissemination of hate speech. Now, when you look at the content of hate speech which is shared, and I will come back to in the next slide, we see that there are contextual differences, of course. The DRC is not Rwanda, is not Burundi, but also, so in that sense, there are different articulation of hate speech, and there are issues of temporality as well. You had a lot of hate speech narratives in Rwanda between 1990 and 1994. But there are quite a lot of thematic convergence between these kind of two dynamics. So I did put, for example, two of the interesting captions there. Ngeze Hassan already in his publication, Kangura, had something about a Tutsi Hima plan of colonization of the Kivu, which is pretty much a reenactment of what we hear today almost on a daily basis about the balkanization of the DRC. Or the Accord of Lemera, which is another reenactment of that narrative of balkanization of the DRC. Now, narratives, hate speech narratives in our analysis were articulated around a few themes that emerged from our research. And as I said, it mainly focused on South Kivu and then caught up with some of the events in North Kivu. But one of the key themes that we had was that the Banyamulenge or Tutsi in general are not Congolese. Everyone who reads Congolese social media today, that argument is repeated probably today, and I'm probably not exaggerating, on a daily basis by quite a number of actors. The Banyamulenge are not Congolese. There's not such a thing as a Congolese tribe, Banyamulenge. If you go to Tervuren, you will never find that one. And that is repeated again. Remember what I said about agency, by different actors at different levels of society. It's repeated by political leaders. So, for example, one of the captions you have there up, it's a video that you can find on YouTube with Fayulu saying the Banyamulenge n'existe pas. And of course, others such as Kwebe Kimpele, mindful of the time. The second theme is that the Banyamulenge and Tutsi are greedy, and their ambition in the DRC is to control Congolese lands and resources and establish a Tutsi Hima empire. So this is quite interesting with for people who follow hate speech in general. Anyone from the Jewish community probably will recognize something around that. The Protocol of Elders of Zion, that's the enactment of that pretty much in the Great Lakes region sense. The Tutsi Hima Empire, which wants to control native lands and so on, is a very recurrent theme that you find in hate speech. And what we have heard quite a lot in recent days as well in relation to Goma and so on, but we did this analysis before all of what is happening in North Kivu, is that the DRC is under Tutsi occupation, the infiltrators. So soldiers recently have been killed, army soldiers, because they feel like they need to get rid of army or of infiltrators who are responsible for whatever goes wrong in the DRC. They are occupants, basically, and agents of occupation. And they're foreigners, of course, in that sense. And the fourth theme is that the Banyamulenge and Tutsi and Rwandans in general are killers. So everything that went wrong, every person probably who died, there is such a thing as a genocide Congolais, it's the responsibility of those foreigners. I think we had even some tweets around, ce sont les mêmes qui tuent, and those are the words that basically always attribute responsibility, and those are narratives which are widely shared. And finally, one key theme that we found was that the Banyamulenge, Tutsi, and Rwandans are manipulative and deceitful, to the extent that many tropes that, again, we recognize in the Rwanda context, you find them again in the Congolese context. Many of you have seen these words. So extensive use of familiar dehumanizing tropes on social media on a daily basis. They are snakes, vipers, cockroaches, vermin, chameleons, but also they are invaders, greedy killers, bloodthirsty criminals, deceptive manipulators, usurpers, hegemonists or expansionists. Those are the words you will recognize again on many Twitter spaces, those who participate in those, among many others. Now, looking at the time again, what does that mean? What does all of that, what does it mean to call someone all of this? And that's why we talk about the harm in hate speech. Now, academics still, contrary to what many people would believe, still disagree a lot on whether hate speech can cause harm. And probably if those academics are from the US, they will even more disagree that it does cause harm with the freedom of expression that people do kind of use. By the way, this was from Goma recently. be aware of the snake. Now, there are indeed quite serious challenges in proving, let's say, the impact of a word on acts. There are reports which say words kill, but those are not literal. But of course, the challenge is to prove how what is said here causes someone to die in North Kivu and so on. But increasingly, there is evidence that that does happen. So because there are different, in order to understand that, you need to understand that different kind of levels of harm. And I'm going towards the end. So some conspiracy narratives can be only that, conspiracy narratives. You have them a lot here, and sometimes they may be less harmful or more harmful than others. The same with dehumanizing tropes. But also increasingly what we have in recent, especially months and days and years in the DRC is more directly insightful messages. Go and kill X people. Go and find those people who are ABC places, the Munyere kind of videos that we saw in Kinshasa, and go and kill them. So that's a form of speech which is insightful, which you tend to find already more likely to have an impact. Because in the DRC case, we found cases where those calls were made and people went after that and killed people. So for instance, in the South Kivu area, people around the Rurambo or Bibokoboko area were killed and their villages burned, but that was preceded by a campaign of hate speech telling actors to go and do that. And there you have quite a very clear case of direct impact of hate speech. But beyond those kind of direct physical impact of hate speech, impact can also be emotional, can be individual, but also can be collective. So as I've said, we have example I just gave. We saw there are kind of impact which may be direct as well. So as I move forward, I'm happy to share some of stuff. You have quite a number of examples that I had here about people directly calling people to be killed. This is one of what I said, for example, in the Haut Plateau area. We go to Minembwe, we'll clear that. We go to Uvira and Haut Plateau and clear that. But also, one of the most known video, of course, when it comes to a recent event in North Kivu, this deputy commissioner of police, basically, who tells everyone to go and take a panga and be part of the popular war. Now, last point, what are the responses to that? And I guess some people will talk about that more than I do, but what I have seen so far, probably then will trigger the next presentation, is that there has been quite a lot of ambivalence vis-a-vis, let's say, there have been quite a lot of ambivalence by Congolese authority vis-a-vis condemning hate speech and taking action especially. I know from fact that many condemnations that were made by the government at Gimme Time, it did make some condemnations of hate speech through official spokesperson, but few we know also were made through pressure but also after other actors had taken a lead. But we know that the first responsibility should be for the state, for the authorities, when there is such a phenomenon, to put an end to it, or at least to institute proceedings, something we'll hear about more. But also, we have had muted condemnation from other actors also, including the region. There is a lot of politics involved. Who do you please and who do you not please? In that sense, that determines, including not only from the development partners, and not only from the regional actors, but also from, let's say, even academics. So the politics of personal positionality matters in terms of whether you are condemning or not condemning hate speech, or you are taking action to curb it. But most importantly, and most worryingly for me at least, is that the fact that so far beyond condemnation, there's almost a quasi-absence of peace building and peace education strategies to come out of that spiral, whether in Congo, whether something targeting the whole region. And the absence of that is very instrumental. And hate speech, of course, moderation. But what is very important then, being in the US, and that's my last point, I see you, Jean-Paul, being here in the US, what is very important point to make also is that we know that the challenge of regulating social media and hate speech that is distributed on social media is a global one. In that sense, you face it in Bosnia, in India, and so on. But some countries have managed to put pressure on social media service providers to take action in at least limiting or curbing. And some, I know, for example, there are some actions that are done here in the US. But you have no equivalent at all when it comes to hate speech on Congolese social media. Some have to do with no investment in the linguistic skills that allow you to actually identify hate speech, but also some have to do with the lack of investment simply in that. So YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and WhatsApp need to be even more proactively engaged and called up for not taking action, but also for not designing, other actors for not designing peace-building strategies to curb hate speech and conspiracy violence in the Congo case. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.